Good evening. I'm George Dilemma, President of Eisenhower Fellowships. Welcome to the opening session of our 2020 annual meeting events as we celebrate our fellows and their impact around the world. With us tonight are more than 400 specially invited guests, including Eisenhower Fellows from 56 countries. We're joined by our Board of Trustees and other friends for 2 days of stimulating conversations about the state of our world and our organization in this year like no other. For the first time, we're hosting all of it virtually as we navigate the vicious coronavirus pandemic that has brought sickness, death, and disruption across the planet. Sadly, nowhere more than here in the United States. Before we begin tonight's program, I'd like to take just a few minutes to update you on a historic year of many firsts at Eisenhower Fellowships. Seems like a lifetime ago when we all gathered in Cartagena, Colombia, back in mid-February for our dynamic global conference on the future of education. Some 245 participants from 37 countries came together for a magical few days on the Caribbean coast of South America to explore this issue of vital importance all over the world. Then almost immediately afterwards, COVID hit hard and turned the world upside down. I'm proud to say that since then, Eisenhower Fellowships have stepped up to meet the moment, overcoming unprecedented challenges. All over the world, Eisenhower Fellows are on the front lines in the fight against COVID. They're developing molecular and antigen tests, turning smartphones into medical devices, and launching mobile laboratories to stop the spread of the virus. They are treating patients in hospitals, directing first responders, producing, collecting, and distributing personal protective equipment, educating people about the pandemic. They're developing public policies that support businesses and reopen schools, funding small entrepreneurs, feeding and housing the hungry and homeless, fighting rampant misinformation, and striving to protect the most vulnerable among us. Odds are that wherever you go in the world, you'll find an Eisenhower Fellow confronting society's most pressing challenges. Many of these fellows are with us tonight, and we salute them. Among them are several groups of fellows to whom we extend an especially warm welcome. Our 2020 Global Fellows and our fellows from our 2020 USA and Jurisdiction China programs. These fellows have been deeply disappointed as we've been forced to postpone their programs until next year. But tonight, they're excited to be with us, connected remotely from across the US and 5 continents. To all of those fellows, welcome. We'll see you soon. We also give a special welcome to another exceptional group of leaders, the fellows in our Women's Leadership Program this fall. 25 outstanding women leaders from 23 countries joined together in the first virtual program in the history of Eisenhower Fellowships. They work in healthcare and economic inclusion, sustainable development and wildlife preservation, criminal justice and online education, civic engagement and social impact through film and theater and sculpture. Their fellowship program attracted more than 1,000 applicants for just 25 slots, by far the most in our history. As you can imagine, the women who rose to the top of that global competition to join our 3rd Women's Leadership Program in the last decade are formidable leaders, scary smart, highly accomplished, profoundly committed to making a positive impact on their societies. They have been engaged with us and with each other virtually for more than a month now. And they have wholeheartedly embraced this exhilarating opportunity to innovate and experiment and discover with energy and brio. Like other Eisenhower Fellows before them, they already have formed their own special bond, a deep personal connection through their shared passion to better our world, a connection they will cherish for a lifetime. Let's take a moment to welcome them to the EF Global family. We have a fabulous lineup of prominent speakers to host them on their groundbreaking program, starting tonight with Tom Friedman of the New York Times, and tomorrow with our chairman, former U.S. Secretary of Defense Robert Gates, and our trustee, Susan Eisenhower. Last week, they met with our vice chair, former Governor Christine Todd Whitman, and ahead are sessions with our trustees, David Eisenhower and former U.S. Secretary of State Madeleine Albright, media maven Ariana Huffington, world-renowned epidemiologist Dr. William Hazeltine, and Dr. Martin Seligman, founder of the Positive Psychology Movement, among many others. In preparation for our women leaders this fall, this summer, our staff reached out to every single person who has hosted a visiting Eisenhower Fellow in the U.S. over the last 10 years. Nearly 4,000 distinguished leaders and experts responded by reaffirming their commitment to partner with EF to host and mentor these and future Eisenhower Fellows, in person or virtually, as the case may be. And each of our women fellows this fall has their own USA Fellow as a mentor to help guide them through their program. So like other Eisenhower Fellows before them, our women leaders this fall are in store for a powerful, transformational fellowship experience, leading to a lifetime commitment to engage with us to advance our mission of enhancing understanding through dialogue to create a world more peaceful, prosperous, and just. They begin this lifelong journey spread out across the planet, each of them physically alone, but alone together. That's our mantra for them this fall, alone together. Though not for long, you'll get to meet them all in person soon. Like our other 2020 fellows whose programs we had to postpone, we will physically bring them together in Philadelphia the next chance we get, and at other EF events thereafter to fully integrate them into our global family. Alone together, that goes for all of us as we gather virtually these 2 days. Our dedicated staff, led by our outstanding Vice President Aaron Hillman, has spent the last 7 months working remotely from home, intensively planning how we can adapt our programs and embracing new technology to engage with our global network in new and exciting ways. Our trustees will be discussing all that and more in their virtual annual meeting of the board tomorrow morning, another first for Eisenhower Fellowships. They will be reviewing the ways we've reformed, modernized, and diversified our governance, including welcoming to the board this year the first trustee from Africa in EF history, our fellow Samaila Zubairu of Nigeria. And they'll be planning how we need to do more. They'll be discussing how we can expand our use of new digital tools, harnessing the intellectual firepower of our trustees and fellows to help us think through how we might employ AI and other new technologies in the coming years. The board will be considering the implications for EF of a rapidly changing global geopolitical landscape. And closer to home, they'll be hearing from some of our prominent USA fellows about how we are responding to the widespread social unrest over racial inequities in the United States with the Eisenhower Fellowships Justice Project, a multi-track, multi-year initiative to examine internally our organization and our values, to leverage and promote the work many of our fellows already do to advance racial justice, and to translate this into concrete action to confront the societal consequences of stubbornly entrenched racism through our future programs and activities. This effort in large part has been led and shaped these last few months by our fellows, aimed at mainstreaming the justice dimension embedded at the heart of our mission into everything we do in a long-term, sustainable way. You'll be hearing more about this in the coming months. In this year first for EF, our board will also meet virtually tomorrow with our inaugural class of Eisenhower Global Scholars, American college graduates embarking this month on a year of postgraduate studies at the University of Oxford and IE University of Madrid, leading to a master's degree, an exciting new youth dimension to our programs. So we have an awful lot going on despite the pandemic. It is fitting that we come together now when there's so much turbulence in the world and the future is so uncertain. Your virtual presence tonight from nearly 6 countries powerfully embodies the enduring ideals of our namesake, President Dwight David Eisenhower. He believed that men and women of goodwill can build a better world through dialogue that leads to understanding, helping confrontation give way to collaboration. Today, his vision guides our work in this independent, non-governmental, nonpartisan, nonprofit organization that bears his name. Eisenhower Fellows build bridges and tear down the walls that divide us across borders and cultures, connecting and empowering leaders of every race, religion, ethnicity, and political persuasion in every region of the planet. This is what Eisenhower Fellows do. This is who we are. In the process, we present the best face of the United States to the rest of the world, our best selves as a nation. It is evident to anyone following the news these days that this special brand of citizen diplomacy that our fellows engage in across the globe is more vital and relevant now than ever. We couldn't do any of this without the generous support of our big-hearted donors. If you've contributed to our work over these difficult last few months, we extend our heartfelt thanks for your generosity. If you would like to support our dynamic fellows and their critical work around the world, please remember us in your giving this year. Your investment in our future is indispensable to everything we do as we honor those leaders who inspire us to do more. Thank you.
Welcome to our program tonight. We're delighted to have with us New York Times Foreign Affairs columnist Tom Friedman. Tom is a 3-time Pulitzer Prize winner, the celebrated author of 7 New York Times best-selling books, and my longtime friend and colleague. Tom and I go way back to our days as correspondents traveling around the world together with then U.S. Secretary of State Jim Baker during another historic time, a period that saw the reunification of Germany, putting a final punctuation to the end of the Cold War, and almost instantly afterwards, Iraq's invasion of Kuwait, setting in motion the first Gulf War, and in many ways that we didn't know then, helping reshape the Middle East and set the groundwork for future conflicts over the next 3 decades. We were 2 guys from the Midwest, from the Twin Cities in Chicago, who had a fascinating front row seat on world history as it was being made right in front of us. I saw up close how talented and hardworking Tom is. What a smart, conscientious, and dogged reporter he's always been. Tom never takes a shortcut. He still gets on the plane, gets his feet on the ground, and reports firsthand before he writes. These are the time-tested secrets to his success. I also learned a little-known fact about Tom back then that I'm going to share with you now. As we flew all over the world together, ushered into the corridors of power from Moscow to Berlin to Kinshasa to Damascus, waiting for Secretary Baker to finish his meetings with this world leader or that one, we would engage in one of Tom's favorite pastimes, liar's poker. This is where you play poker with the numbers printed on a dollar bill. We played at the Kremlin in Jerusalem. I think we played at the Sheraton Hotel in Taif, Saudi Arabia. The Emir of Kuwait waited out the Gulf War. We played in Cairo, in Paris, in Ankara, and Geneva. On one unforgettable night, when Baker was hosting then-Soviet Foreign Minister Edward Shevardnadze, Texas style, in his hometown of Houston, we played, when Tom and I slipped off to see, undoubtedly the worst movie ever made up to that time, Rocky V. You probably won't be surprised to know that Tom is a hell of a liar's poker player. He had a bunch of singles he took from my pocket to prove it. Years later, I also learned that Tom has long been a friend of Eisenhower Fellowships. He was one of the people who most encouraged me to come here a few years ago when I reached out to him after some headhunters up in Boston called me when John Wolfe retired. Eisenhower Fellowships? Classy organization, Tom said. Just hosted an Eisenhower Fellow from India a couple weeks ago.
Yeah.
Really, it's terrific. The food scene is blowing up there. You and Carrie will love it. You need to do this. So you can all blame Tom. He's a big fan of our organization, and tonight he's graciously agreed to sit down with us to discuss how he sees the world these days. As we near a momentous U.S. presidential election, amid the global pandemic that has disrupted life all over the planet, infecting even the most highly protected person on Earth. Tom and I are going to have a conversation about all that, and then he'll take questions from our virtual audience, joining us remotely from some 56 countries. Thank you to everyone who submitted questions in advance. You can use the Q&A box on the right side of your screen to ask Tom a question. Please be sure to identify your country. Like all our sessions over the next 2 days, this conversation is being recorded. We will try to get to as many questions as time will allow before we finish around 7 p.m. Eastern Time. So thank you again, Tom, for being with us. Today happens to mark the 130th anniversary of the birth of our namesake, President Dwight David Eisenhower. Wonder what he would have made of today's world.
Wow. Well, George, it's really a treat to be with you as my friend and with the Eisenhower Fellowship Program. It's just such a wonderful program that brings the best of the world to America and shows the best of America to the world. So, and congratulations on your tenure. You've been such a great director, and happy to be with you. 31 years since we were on Baker's plane. I can't believe that. Where did the time go? What would Dwight Eisenhower make of the world today? Well, it's so profoundly different in so many ways, George. I would say the four biggest things that I think he would find really different is one is the pace of change. The world is fast. It's not just flat. It's really, really fast. Second, I'm sure he'd be awed by how fused the world is. We're not just interconnected anymore. We're not just interdependent. We're fused. I'm sure he would, like all of us, be gape-mouthed at how deep the world has become. By deep, I mean the way technology now can go deep into everything, from toggling your DNA to exploring the depths of the ocean or the depths of space. It's why we suddenly added this word deep to everything. Deep fake, deep mind, deep medicine, deep research. We kind of intuit that technology is going places it never went before. And lastly, I think like all of us, he'd be amazed at how open the world is, George, how every person with a cell phone can now be a paparazzi, a filmmaker, a publisher, an editor, and share with the world whatever they see, write, feel, film, or fake, without an editor, a libel lawyer, or anything else. So the world is so open now. You put all those together, fast, fused, deep, and open, and you have a dizzying pace of change right now. I guess that's what I'm thinking about most.
Well, it's funny because some things don't change. And
Yes.
so last month, you caught my attention and you took me into the Wayback Machine when you wrote, tongue-in-cheek, that you would quietly change your job description a few years ago from New York Times Foreign Affairs columnist to New York Times Humiliation and Dignity columnist. And it brought back memories of conversations on Baker's Plain in places like Syria and Germany and the Soviet Union about how bitter resentments from wounded dignity and humiliation have been handed down generation to generation to fuel so many historic conflicts in so many parts of the world. Why don't you talk with us a little about that? How do you see those powerful sentiments playing out in the U.S. and in the world today and driving so many of the headlines we see every day?
Well, George, I actually have my card here because I changed my business card. It actually, I've expanded it. It actually says New York Times humility, humiliation, dignity, trust, leadership, ownership, and amplification columnist. So I'll tell you what's behind all 6 of those. Humiliation and dignity, because really it's the biggest thing I've learned. The humiliation and dignity are the 2 most powerful human emotions. And they really drive so much behavior at the individual level and the nation state level. China after a century of humiliation. Russia, the humiliating loss of power with the defeat in the Cold War. Palestinians feeling humiliated by Israelis. Sephardic Jews in Israel feeling humiliated by Ashkenazi Jews. And Lord knows in our country, white working class Americans feeling humiliated by liberal elites they think look down on them. Blacks and other minorities feeling humiliated by police in some of their confrontations. And so I really reflected on that a lot and realized that actually that's mostly what I've been covering these last 40 years. I've been covering people acting out on their humiliation and questing for dignity. And they really are the 2 most powerful human emotions. I added trust, though, to my business card because one of the things I've learned is that my teacher, Dov Seidman, likes to say that trust is the only legal performance-enhancing drug. Trust is the only legal performance-enhancing drug. Wherever there's trust in the room, good things happen. And when trust isn't in the room, bad things happen. And right now in America, as I look at that presidential photo over your shoulder, George, I think what President Ike would be most saddened by is the breakdown of trust in our country today, because truth and trust are really the pillars of democracy. And if you don't have shared truth and you don't have shared trust, you can't do anything big. No way you can do D-Day in any area, military, economic, environmental, or its equivalents, without truth and trust. I added leadership, also applies to the guy behind you, because when an organization has a great leader, it can do anything, and a bad leader can ruin the best organization. Certainly one of the things I've learned, whether it's a newsroom, whether it's a junior high school, whether it's a military unit, but the importance of leadership. Ownership, that's another big thing I learned all these years, that when, I'm a big believer, huge believer, you can put this on my tombstone, that in the history of the world, I didn't make this up, but I really believe by this. In the history of the world, no one has ever washed a rented car. In the history of all mankind, no one has ever washed a rented car. I know that somebody in the audience said, I once washed a rented car, but you're the exception, because when people are renting their home, when people feel like they're renting their country, when kids don't have ownership of their education, when teachers don't have ownership of their classroom, bad things happen. But when people feel ownership of their home, their classroom, their education, their party, their country, good things happen. People wash things that they own. And lastly, amplification. Amplification, George, is there because I actually learned over the years, the biggest thing I learned is how dumb I am. That as arrogant as I was to think I knew how to fix Iraq or Afghanistan, I don't even know how to fix Minneapolis anymore, George. But what I've learned is, as a good reporter, when I see people out there doing things that clearly work, that they started, I want to amplify them. So when I saw the Kurds starting an American university in Suleimaniya, I didn't start that, you didn't start that, we didn't start that, they started it. When they asked me to come and be their commencement speaker, I said, I'm going to get on a plane and do that. I want to amplify you. So when that's really my foreign policy now. I'm not for containment or enlargement. I'm for amplification. Where I see people doing good things out in the world, I want to use my pen and my microphone to amplify what they're doing. And I think that's what America should be doing. And the Eisenhower Fellowships is you're amplifying the insights, the innovations, the aspirations of all your fellows. And I think we're always best when we're amplifiers, not when we're invaders, not when we're, whatever. I don't know how to fix your country, but when I see people doing it, you fixing it, I want to amplify you because you'll have ownership of it too, and good things will follow.
Well, Tom, as you know, Eisenhower Fellowships, it's many things, but one thing it's a strictly nonpartisan, nonprofit organization. Though, Lord knows, many people here, including some of our top current and former leaders, are pretty open and vocal about how they see the presidential election coming up. But as correspondents, you and I both have known and covered American leaders from both political parties whom we've admired and respected. I think back to Jim Baker, two of our past chairmen here at Eisenhower Fellowships, General Powell and late President Bush, and our current chairman, Secretary Gates. I seem to remember he came with us on a trip or two back then. I think
to Russia.
Maybe went to the Middle East on Baker's plane with us all those years ago. So I know that you don't come at this with any particular ideological bias. You've always respected leaders who make sense and pragmatically look to solve problems regardless of their partisan affiliation. But recently you wrote that as we near this pivotal presidential election, you're more fearful now for the future of our country than at any time in the last 2 centuries of our history. That you see this moment as more perilous to our continued existence as a democracy than the Civil War, more dangerous than the day after Pearl Harbor attack in 1941, more threatening than the Cuban Missile Crisis, more menacing than after 9/11. So do you really believe that? And how did your thinking evolve to get you there? What is it about this moment that you fear so much?
Well, George, everyone's affected by, their life experiences. And for me, the most powerful life experience is where I started as a journalist. I started covering a civil war in Lebanon. That was really, I was hired in London, but my first assignment was Beirut for UPI and then the New York Times. And what I saw in Lebanon, I saw a country, a democracy, albeit a frail and flawed one. I saw it come apart. I saw it fly apart. And I saw it plunged into civil war for 14 years. And it plunged into that civil war because people started to go all the way. And John Randall wrote a book about Lebanon, and it was really aptly titled Going All the Way. And what he meant by that is that someone wrote a biography actually of Ariel Sharon. He called it Doesn't Stop at Red Lights. It was about people thinking you can stress a system, you can violate rules and norms, and you can do it endlessly and indefinitely, and the system will never break. But the system will break. I was just talking to my editor shortly before we started, George. I've been a Wednesday columnist for the New York Times for 25 years. There were a few periods where I wasn't, but I've basically been a Wednesday columnist for 25 years now. And what that means is I have the first column after every election. I write Tuesday night for Wednesday. So I've had some crazy nights in these 25 years. Last election was a really wild night. I actually wrote 3 different columns. The first one was sort of tilted slightly that Hillary was going to win. The second was neutral. And of course, the third edition was that Trump won. But all 3 columns, George, ended with the same quote. It's from a friend of mine, Leslie Goldwasser. She's an immigrant from Zimbabwe, grew up in Bulawayo, small town in Zimbabwe, lived in America now for 30 years, almost 30 years. And Leslie had said to me one day, Tom, you Americans kick around your country like it's a football, but it's not a football. It's a Fabergé egg. You can drop it. You can break it. Be careful. So people who have gone through civil wars know, that you can't just go all the way. I should say in the Middle East, extremists go all the way and moderates tend to just go away. And we have people doing things now, George, to our system, stressing not only rules, but norms. And what you really learn is the Constitution's a bunch of words. It's really the norms that matter the most. Because if you have the wrong norms, you can twist those words any way you want. So to not put too fine a point on it, George, I think America's on the ballot on November 3rd. This could crack. This could break. And one thing I learned in Lebanon, if you break it, it's really hard to get it back together again. So I hope everyone will make the right choice. I'll leave it at that.
And I would just say, everybody vote, please vote. So, Tom, you've been, it's no secret, you've been very critical of President Trump. But for all your criticism of him, there are two areas where you've credited the Trump administration for its foreign policy. One is the Middle East, the recent recognition of Israel by the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain, and their establishment of diplomatic relations. And the other one, the Trump administration's instincts to push back against China, where you've praised them for confronting Beijing on trade and other geopolitical issues. So let's take them separately. Let's take the Middle East first. The recognition of Israel by these two Gulf Arab states, you wrote, is a really big deal. It's a political earthquake. Lord knows the Middle East is a place where American foreign policy dreams go to die. But you see new life for the prospect of positive change after the dreams ignited by the Arab Spring back in 2011 and 2012 brought so much violence and instability to the region, from Damascus to Mosul to Tripoli. Where is all this headed now? And how much does the United States, that steadily has been retrenching in the world, how much does the United States have to say in determining what happens next there?
Good questions, George. Yes, I have not hesitated to credit the president when I think he's doing the right thing. So I call balls and strikes. He even, for a couple of weeks after the UAE deal, would say, and Tom Friedman from the New York Times said this is a good thing. Truth is, he even called me to thank me. So, and we know each other, the president and I, and we knew each other from before, and I'm very open about my supporting Biden, but at the same time, I call balls and strikes. So when I see something good, I'm going to praise it. To me, at the sort of broadest level, George, the more the Middle East starts to look like the European Union, where countries trade and have tourism and free flow between one another and can collaborate, the more it looks like the European Union and less like the Syrian civil war. That's a good thing. And so for me, this was a no-brainer. The fact that really the most successful Arab state, the UAE, partnering with the most successful non-Arab state, Israel, is a good thing, and I think they will create energy around a lot of things, and not just confrontation with Iran, but around healthcare and agriculture and education and all kinds of synergies, and maybe begin to diffuse what is really an unnatural thing, George, which is the antipathy between Muslims and Jews that was triggered really by the return of the Jewish people to their ancient homeland and the whole Zionist movement, which really put Arabs and Jews at odds together, which is not actually true of their broad history. If all Jews had lived in the Arab world, there'd be 6 million more Jews alive today. Jews were second-class citizens in these countries, as were Christians, but Jews thrived in many of these countries. And when you go to Israel and you meet Iraqi Jews and Egyptian Jews and Moroccan Jews, and many of them really have fond memories, or their grandparents have fond memories, of their times in these countries. And so when you get a country like the UAE, which was the first to invite the Pope to come, which is building a kind of faith center there with probably the world's biggest mosque, church, and synagogue, in one place. It's just a good thing. Are these places democracies? No. One of my rules, I have 87 rules of Middle East reporting, George. They're so politically incorrect that I'll only publish them posthumously. But one of them is that in the Middle East, you get big change when the big players do the right thing for the wrong reason. If you wait for everyone to do the right thing for the right reason, you wait forever. You think Anwar Sadat wasn't trying to get weapons out of America when he went to Jerusalem? More aid, that it wasn't about economics? Of course it was. And same with the UAE and Bahrain. But, if you're, as I said in when I wrote about it, this deal sends a lot of a message. If you're a Lebanese today living under the thumb of Hezbollah, and you spent the morning bartering eggs for chickens because your economy is so broken, thanks to Hezbollah's awful mismanagement of the Lebanese economy, among others. And then you look at the UAE and Israel collaborating on high tech and agriculture and medicine and whatnot. That plants some seeds, Like, why aren't we like them? Why are we like this? So I think it was a good thing all around. I expect it will slowly over time be expanded. And, I think you'll see Morocco maybe at some point. And but does it relieve Israel of the need to resolve the Palestinian issue? No. In fact, I think it will make it sharper, because I think that the Palestinian issue, as I wrote about it, will become more of an internal Israeli issue. And that will pose all kinds of civil rights and civil liberties questions for Israel. But I hope it'll also pressure the Palestinian leadership to get their act together too, because they've been drifting as well. On China, my view on China is very simple. This is my personal view, ladies and gentlemen. My personal view is that Donald Trump is not the American president that Americans deserve, but he is the American president that China deserves. Because we did need somebody to call the game. And the president, I think, showed real toughness and in basically kind of drawing a line, with China, that a lot of things we had looked the other way on, whether it was, cyber warfare or stealing intellectual property or non-compliance of trade agreements and non-reciprocation. Somebody had to call the game, and the President Trump did it. I wish he would have followed it up by aligning with the European Union and the Trans-Pacific Trade Partnership and create a sort of broader front, not make it America versus China, but the world versus China on what are the right and fair trade rules. But that's a relationship that's going to be undergoing some real transformation in the coming years.
And where do you see all this going, Tom? Can this mounting confrontation we're seeing between China, an ascendant power, and the United States, which rightly or wrongly many countries see as a declining power, can this be turned back on a productive path, or do you fear it's destined to lead to conflict? And as you know, Eisenhower Fellowships, we've been working a long time in China. We have many fellows, really valued fellows there, as well as in the U.S., working hard to prevent that. So this is a deeply relevant question for us.
Well, you have to understand, to me, George, I think that we're seeing the end of an epoch. And the epoch was 1979 to 2019, 4 decades in which the U.S. and China really became the real one country, two systems. Our countries just really integrated economically with one another. And it was kind of almost unconscious. You could wake up as an American company and say, I want to have a supply chain in China. You could be a Chinese company and say, I want to be listed on the NASDAQ. And you just kind of do it. That's over. That's over. And it's over, I would say, because China overreached in some areas and because America underperformed, frankly. And so we're getting an imbalance of power here. But it's also over for a deeper structural reason, George. It goes back to that word deep. Really for the first 30 years of that 40-year period, which is a period that produced enormous prosperity and stability for the whole world. We will miss it when it's gone. For the first 30 years, China sold us shallow goods, stuff we wore on our shoulders, socks we wore on our feet, shoes we wore on our socks we wore on our ankles, shoes we wore on our feet, solar panels we put on our roofs. They sold us what I call shallow goods. We sold them deep goods, semiconductors, software, stuff that went deep inside every system in the Chinese government and economy. Well, in the last 5-6 years, because of China's own ascendant technological prowess, China now can make deep goods too and want to sell them to us. Things like Huawei 5G. And the problem is we don't have a trust relationship to buy their deep goods. When they were just selling us shallow goods, toys, t-shirts, and tennis shoes, frankly, we didn't care whether they were authoritarian, libertarian, or vegetarian. But when they want to sell us deep goods, stuff that goes in the chatbot in my bedroom, into the wiring underneath my sidewalk, or in the walls of my home, whoa, then suddenly the clash of values, the mismatch, starts to really matter. And that's why we've got a lot of work, a lot of trust building we need to do between us before we're going to be able to take this relationship to the next level. As Xi Jinping gave a very important address today, talking about becoming more self-sufficient. And I think we're heading for a world with a digital Berlin Wall. You and I got to see the real Berlin Wall come down, George, and we've lived long enough to see a new digital Berlin Wall start to be erected. That's going to create a kind of a two technology zone world. Are you in the Chinese ecosystem or are you in the American ecosystem? And don't automatically assume we will win that. We'll win that battle.
Yeah. Just one or two more, then I'm going to open it up to some questions. The last time you and I were together for an Eisenhower Fellowships gathering, it was a conversation we recorded for our global conference in Malaga 3 years ago on the future of work.
That's right.
How do you see the future of work after COVID, when all around the world, countless millions of people are out of work, and those fortunate enough to not lose their jobs are now working so very differently than they were before, and relying really for our daily existence on people they really didn't notice in their daily lives before?
Absolutely. I think that, just speaking broadly, George, I think we're on the cusp of an era of creative destruction, the likes of which we may never have seen in history, because never have more people had access to cheap distributed tools of innovation. I mean, there's so much I can do with this thing. Never have more people had access, whether it's this or 3D manufacturing, you name it, more cheap tools of innovation. Never have more people been able to connect these cheap tools to cloud computing, to get access to the most powerful compute in the world for pennies, okay? So never had more people, more tools, and never more people able to connect those tools to powerful compute. Third, never have more people had access to cheap money. Interest rates are zero. Money's free. Now you give all these people these cheap tools of innovation, connect them to the cloud, and then make money free. And then think about all the problems that need to be solved today. And you are going to see a period of creative destruction that's going to knock your socks off. Gosh, the New York Times already announced we're not coming back to our office until July 2021. I mean, that's, between now and then, how good will Zoom and Cisco WebEx and these get? What will be my life after that? Because, George, we're not face-to-face. I can't give you a high five, okay? I can't feel the intimacy of face-to-face. But this about 90% is good. And neither of us had to get on a plane or a train, and nobody's jet lagged. And I'm speaking to 216 Eisenhower Fellows, probably on 6 different continents, So that's kind of cool. Is that going away when COVID goes away? I don't think so. So, people often ask me, hey, Friedman, is the world still flat? I say, baby, is the world still flat? Well, yesterday I began my morning with a webinar in Berlin. This morning I began my morning with a webinar in Argentina. I ended it, with the Eisenhower Fellows via Philadelphia to 215 people all over the world. Flat. It's flatter than ever, baby, and it's going to get even flatter.
Actually, it's 400 people.
Oh, really?
The other advantage of tonight is my wallet is not lighter at the end of the evening. But let me take a question here from one of our fellows from the Philippines, Bam Aquino. He asks, what do you think the policy for the region, writing from the Philippines, will be for a Biden presidency moving forward?
I think that a Biden presidency will be a return to a conventional American Atlantic Alliance and Pacific Alliance strategy. So I think you'll see America, Japan, America, Korea, America, Australia, America, Philippines, going back to just a more traditional alliance strategy to balance China. And I think you'll see the same in Europe vis-a-vis the Soviet Union. So I don't see it being a radical departure, but there are things that President Trump has done that I think will change. I think you will see a more tough-minded approach toward China. And I don't say it as criticism of the Obama administration, because there was actually a transition China was going through, and we were going through vis-a-vis China. It began under President Obama. Remember, he really took troops from the Middle East and sent them to Asia and began this shift of power. And President Trump continued it. So, but I think you will see just generally a return to a more conventional American foreign policy with our conventional allies.
Well, along the same lines, we have another question from a fellow, one of our Women's Leadership Fellows this fall from Saudi Arabia, Thoraya Ismail. If Biden wins the presidential elections, to what extent would U.S. foreign policy towards the Middle East differ from that of the Trump administration?
Well, it's a good question also. And it's another area where, so I supported President Obama's Iran nuclear deal in my column. I thought it was worth a try. But frankly, I've not been upset that President Trump tore it up because I think Iran overreached in the wake of it. We tried. I think it was worth trying. And I think Iran very mistakenly and erroneously and foolishly overreached as a result of it. And so should Biden be elected president, he's not going to go back to the original Iran nuclear deal. I'm certain of that. In fact, if Biden is elected president, Trump is going to leave him a lot of leverage on the table vis-a-vis Iran and vis-a-vis China. That a Biden presidency could actually use as negotiating chips and get a kind of synthesis between Trump and Biden that I think would benefit America. So I took a Trump to break the Iran deal, but I think it would take a Biden to actually forge a new nuclear deal with Iran. But it won't be the old deal. It won't be on the old terms. That ship has sailed.
To switch the subject a little bit to something that we've spent a lot of time with in our professional tribe, from our fellow Jorge Rio Pedre, a USA fellow in St. Louis, he puts in quotes, both sidesism and false equivalency are damaging the effectiveness and credibility of the media. Is there any way to change this dynamic, or have we entered a time when the person claiming the world is flat will be given the same legitimacy as someone who says the world is round?
Very clever. You know, it's a very good question. It's very, very challenging. Hold on one second. Hey, Mo? I'm on a call. Can I call you back? I'm on a call. I'll call you back. You know, those of us who started as reporters and became columnists, we have it bred into us that you should listen to and give respect to both sides. But certainly the last 4 years in particular have completely stressed that. And when someone is telling you that climate change is a hoax, when someone is telling you that you don't need to wear a mask in the pandemic, you name it. When someone tells you that their phone call with a foreign leader was perfect, when obviously it was not. This has really, really stressed that. And so anyone reading my column knows I've not been doing both sides of lately. But at the same time, you don't want to do the reverse and not ask hard questions. I think one of the problems in this pandemic is that from the very beginning, we needed to have a strategy that would balance saving lives and saving livelihoods at the same time. That if we just focus on saving every life in a pandemic, you will end up killing the hopes and dreams of so many people. You will create deaths of despair and depression that will be far outstrip the casualties of COVID-19. If we focus on just saving every job, you'll condemn Americans, our brothers and sisters, to death who should no way be exposed to that with that kind of indifference. So when you're in a pandemic and you're up against Mother Nature, there's always trade-offs. You don't get to just say, oh, stop, we're just going to put the economy on hold for a year. And you don't get to say, herd immunity now, hey, if we lose grandma, too bad. We needed to have an adult conversation about how we actually balance lives and livelihoods. And to me, the saddest thing about our behavior, George, as a society in this pandemic is we could never have that adult conversation. If you talked about saving livelihoods, you were accused of being a sociopath only interested in your 401k. And if you talked about saving every life, you were accused of being an innocent naif who doesn't understand that, you don't turn the whole economy upside down just to extend the life of someone who's going to die of something else in 6 months or a year. So each side, we kind of had a pandemic and an infodemic at the same time, with each side caricaturing the other. And unfortunately, we didn't have anyone in the middle kind of navigating this and saying, can we just have an adult conversation about this? And as a result, I think we've hurt ourselves economically and in terms of loss of life far worse than should have happened.
Tom, we're nearing the end. Just two more. One
Please.
From Nigeria, from our fellow Adenike Adeyemi, who writes, young Nigerians over the last few days have organically mobilized to protest police brutality and violence by the Special Anti-Robbery Squad. What do you see as the evolving role of young people in mobilizing advocacy for change and transformation?
Wow, that's it's a really great question and sounds like a real Eisenhower Fellow who would ask that. What is so great about this moment is that it gets to that open part I talked about. I like to read the Financial Times and the New York Times and all that, but I also read all kinds of user-generated content now. And if you can tell your story compellingly in Nigeria today, and you can get it almost into any kind of outlet now, if it's good, that cream will now rise to the top. You don't have to start like I did, working for UPI on Fleet Street. And, if you're good now, and you can get your story out, or if you have a cause, as in Nigeria, and think of the case of George Floyd. Someone with one of these photographed what those policemen in Minneapolis were doing on Chicago Avenue, and they changed the world. They changed the whole world. And so the world is open in ways that it's never been before, but you just want to always make sure you get your fundamentals right. It's not just enough to take something and put 15 seconds out. It's about making sure it's true, but framing it in the right way that it can hold up to scrutiny. And if it holds up to scrutiny, it will have power and will be truly amplified. But there's never been a better time to be an activist, a social entrepreneur, a foreign correspondent, where you just declare yourself the Nigeria bureau chief. If you can report it and write it in a compelling way and get it out, the world is your oyster. It's never been more open, so go for it.
Okay, well, before we close, let me thank you again, Tom, for being such a good friend of Eisenhower Fellowships.
My pleasure.
You've generously been hosting fellows since way before I got here. And I had a last question for you. One of our fellows, Antoinette Hubbard, a USA fellow, has a version of this. I'm going to combine the two of them. She writes, Robert Bellah some years ago made a statement that the common good is the search for the good in common. In today's polarized world in politics, where might we begin? And I was going to ask, so I'll take it a step further, what role do you see for networks of leaders and dynamic doers like Eisenhower Fellows in helping their societies adapt to and help shape this brave new world we're all confronting? How can we, Eisenhower Fellowships, make a real impact here?
Well, George, I spent a lot of time looking at small towns in America. And why does one town rise and another fall? I profile Lancaster, Pennsylvania, Wilmer, Minnesota, to name two. And two that really rose. And the ones that rose, what did they have in common? What they have in common is a high density of leaders without authority. Leaders without authority. They're the most important leaders in any town, in any community. Because they're not necessarily the mayor. No, they're just that man or woman in the town who says, not going to happen here. I'm not going to let my town get ripped apart or go down the drain. And they step up. And the second thing they have in common is these leaders without authority all start to network together. And they create what I call a complex adaptive coalition. Which ecosystems in nature thrive when the climate changes? Those that build complex adaptive networks, where the different elements of the ecosystem all network together to maximize their resilience and propulsion. As in nature, so in society. The countries, the communities of the towns that build complex adaptive coalitions where the business community partners with the education community, partners with the philanthropic community, partners with the social entrepreneur community, partners with the local paper, partners with the local political leadership and mayor. Those are the ones that create those coalitions. They're the ones that are going to thrive, not just survive, but thrive in this age where the world's getting so fast, infused, and deep and open. So, if you want to make a difference, build something with someone else. What's that old African proverb? If you want to go far, go together.
Well, you're talking to Eisenhower, preaching to the choir, because Eisenhower Fellows work together and build relationships of trust, as you mentioned, that are so important to actually get things done and to make an impact. So thank you, Tom. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in extending our heartfelt gratitude to my friend and colleague, the incomparable Tom Friedman. I told you this would be fun. Thank you, Tom.
It was, George. Good luck with your conference. Your meeting.
Thank you. This concludes our opening session of our annual meeting events. Please join us again tomorrow for the sessions for which you've registered. As we sign off, we want to thank all our generous supporters presented for you here on this Roll of Honor. Thank you and good night.